Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, we dig in, and we try to pull out the best parts. Today we're jumping into something really foundational. The very first lines of the Mishnah, that's the core text of the oral Torah. We're looking right at the start of Tractate Berakhot, the first one, and it kicks off immediately with a fundamental question. When exactly do you recite the evening Shema?
Yeah, and what's so striking, as your sources really lay out, is just how much depth, how much debate is packed into those opening lines. It's way more than just setting a time on a clock. It's about understanding the text, how it connects to practice, and grappling with different views over, well, centuries.
Exactly. And you've given us this fantastic set of materials. We've got the Mishnah itself, the Gemara's deep dive on it, plus all these later commentaries, Rashi, Tosafot.
Rabbeinu Tam, Rif, Rish, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, the whole chain of tradition, really.
Right. So our mission today for you listening is to kind of walk through these sources. We want to pull out the key opinions, the Gemara's really sharp questions.
And some surprising historical layers, too. It shows why this topic, which seems simple at first glance, is actually anything but.
Okay, so if you're ready to explore how these ancient texts get built, debated, applied, let's dive in. We're starting right at square one, the Mishnah's first question. So the Mishnah just opens with, from when does one recite Shema in the evening? Okay, why this? Why is this the absolute first thing the Mishnah teaches?
Well, the sources point out that reciting Shema, it's seen as just fundamental. It's the acceptance of, the yoke of heaven, the mitzvah. It's the foundation. So starting there, it makes a lot of sense conceptually. It's the groundwork for everything else in Jewish practice.
Okay, got it. So let's unpack this then. As soon as it asks when, boom, we get different opinions, which tells you a lot about how the Mishnah works, right? Presenting debate from the get-go.
Absolutely. So Rabbi Eliezer speaks first. He says the time starts from the time when the priests enter to partake of their terumah. That's their special portion, basically. And he says it lasts until the end of the first watch of the night. He's connecting that key phrase from the Torah, when you lie down.
Deuteronomy 6.7, right?
Right. He links that to when people are actually getting ready for sleep, the beginning of the night.
Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer connects lying down to the start of bedtime. Then the rabbis, what's their view?
The rabbis, they give a bit more time. They say it extends until midnight.
Midnight, okay. And then there's Rabban Gamliel.
Rabban Gamliel, yes. He has the most lenient position. He says you can actually recite it until dawn. His take on when you lie down is much broader. He understands it as the entire time you're potentially in bed, so basically the whole night.
And the Mishnah doesn't just list these opinions, it gives us a story. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Tell us about Rabban Gamliel and his sons.
Right, there's this famous incident. Rabban Gamliel's sons come home really late from a wedding feast, a celebration hall, and they hadn't said Shema yet, so they asked their father. And Rabban Gamliel tells them point blank, if dawn hasn't broken, you're still obligated. Go say it.
So he lived by his own ruling, the more lenient one, even though the rabbi's consensus seemed to be midnight. How does he justify that? How does he square it?
That's a really key clarification that Gemara brings out. Rabban Gamliel explains that, look, when the rabbis said until midnight, they weren't setting the absolute, Torah law deadline. They were setting the ideal time, the lakatala, the preferred time. But the actual window, badayave, if you miss the ideal, that really does go until dawn. And he says this doesn't just apply to Shema, but other things the sages said were until midnight, like eating certain sacrifices.
Okay, so the ideal is midnight, but the absolute cutoff is dawn. Why would the rabbis even say midnight then? Why create that earlier marker?
The sources explain it's a practical measure. They establish midnight in order to distance a person from transgression. The worry was, if you tell people they have all night until dawn, they might get lazy, put it off, maybe fall asleep.
And miss it completely.
Exactly. So the midnight thing is like a safeguard, a prompt. Get it done earlier in the night to be safe.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the basic Mishnah debate, the clarification from Rabban Gamliel. Now, the Gemara comes in, this later layer of analysis, and it starts asking some, pretty surprising structural questions right away.
It really does. The Gemara basically asks, hold on, Mishnah, how can you just start by asking from when? Yeah. This is Mishnah number 1. You haven't even established that we have to say Shema. It's asking, what's the assumed knowledge here? What's the Tana, the teacher of the Mishnah, taking for granted?
That's a great question. It really treats the Mishnah as part of an ongoing conversation, not just starting from zero.
Precisely. And it asks another big structural question. Why evening Shema first? Why not morning? So many mitzvah, especially temple stuff like the daily offerings, they're focused on the daytime. So why lead with the night?
Okay, good questions.
Yeah.
How does the Gemara answer them? How does it justify the Mishnah structure?
It offers a couple of really interesting answers. One is, it's just following the order of that verse we keep mentioning, Deuteronomy 6.7, when you lie down and when you arise. Evening comes first in the verse, so the Mishnah discusses evening first.
Ah, so it mirrors the scripture.
Right. It shows the oral Torah lining up with the written Torah.
Is there another reason given?
Yes, there's an alternative. The Tana might be deriving the order from creation itself, Genesis 1. You know how it says for each day, and there was evening and there was morning, one day. Evening comes first in the cosmic order of a day.
Wow, okay. So either the specific Shema verse or the fundamental order of creation dictates starting with the evening. But the Gemara isn't quite done with structure, is it?
No. It keeps digging. Later in the tractate, the Mishnah discusses the blessings around Shema. Morning, 2 before, 1 after. Evening, 2 before, 2 after. So the Gemara notices, wait a minute, if evening Shema comes first, conceptually, scripturally, why, later on, does the Mishnah detail the morning blessings before it details the evening blessings? Seems inconsistent again.
Yeah, that does sound backwards compared to the start. How's that resolved?
The Gemara explains the flow. The Tana did start with evening Shema time. That was Mishnah 1. Then he moved on to discuss morning Shema. And while he was on the topic of morning Shema, he just finished off all the related morning details, including the blessings. Then he circled back to the evening blessings.
Okay, so it's like topic flow. Once you start talking about the morning, finish the morning stuff before going back to evening details.
Exactly. It's not strictly hierarchy for every single detail, but more about completing a subtopic once you're in it.
Got it. Okay, let's loop back to Rabbi Eliezer's starting time. When the priests enter to partake of their terumah, the Gemara asks, okay, when is that precisely?
And the Gemara clarifies that time is from the time of the emergence of the stars, basically nightfall.
Right. So why didn't the Mishnah just say emergence of the stars? Why use that longer phrase about priests and terumah?
Yeah.
Seems unnecessarily complicated.
But this is where you see the Mishnah's incredible density. The Gemara explains the Tana used that specific phrase to teach us something else in passing. Milta al-gav or you kamash malan. He teaches us something along the way. It's a classic Gemara concept.
A hidden bonus lesson. Okay, what's the side teaching here?
It's a specific point of law about ritual purity for priests. See, if a priest became impure, immersed in a mikveh, he could generally eat terumah after sunset. Now, sometimes he might still need to bring an atonement offering later. The Mishnah's phrase subtly teaches that failing to bring that offering doesn't stop him from eating terumah once night falls, after he's immersed. What does stop him is if the sun hasn't set yet after his immersion.
Wow. So the Mishnah uses the exact time when a priest can eat terumah after immersion, even before his offering, as the marker for when Shema starts. And in doing so, it teaches that purity law.
Precisely. It's rooted in how you read Leviticus 22, verse 7. And the sun sets and it is purified. Does it is purified refer to the priest himself, maybe needing the offering? Or the day becoming pure, meaning night has fallen? The Gemara concludes it means the day is purified, night has arrived, that's when the immersed priest can eat. And that's when Shema time begins. It's very neat.
Super elegant. Okay, so the Mishnah and Gemara seem to land on emergence of the stars as the proper start time.
Yeah.
But your sources mentioned something about common practice, right?
Yes, absolutely. There's this very old, very widespread custom. It's discussed in the Jerusalem Talmud, debated heavily later on. People would often say the evening Shema much earlier, usually in the synagogue, tacked onto the afternoon or evening prayers, often well before the stars were actually out.
So how did the big commentators, the later rabbis, deal with that? If the text seems to point to star time, how did they understand or justify this earlier custom?
Well, this led to some significant debate and different strategies. Rashi, for instance, took the view that the Shema people said early in shul. That wasn't the main fulfillment of the mitzvah. For Rashi, the real obligated Shema was the one you were supposed to say later, at home, ideally right before bed, even if it was just the first paragraph, the shul reading. That was more like a preparation for prayer, saying some words of Torah before the Amidah, not the main event.
So Rashi basically says, Shul Shema is nice, but the real one is the bedtime Shema.
That was his interpretation, yeah. But it got challenged. The Tosafot, who came after Rashi, they pushed back hard. They asked, wait, how can just one paragraph at bedtime fulfill the whole thing? And why are there no blessings with this supposedly main bedtime Shema? Isn't the bedtime Shema historically more about protection?
Okay, so Rashi's view had problems. What other explanations were there for the early custom?
Rabbeinu Tam, one of the key Tosafists, he went in a totally different direction. He argued that the earlier time, even significantly earlier, like Plag Haminsha, an hour and a quarter before sunset actually is a valid time to fulfill the Torah obligation. He lined up with views that define night as starting earlier for prayer purposes, essentially connecting the Shema time with the evening prayer time, even if it's before dark.
Interesting. So one says the early one doesn't count, another says the early one does count, different ways to make sense of the practice.
Exactly. And then you have major codifiers like the Rif, the Rosh, Rambam, later the Shulchan Aruch. They generally stuck closer to the Mishnah's plain meaning. They maintained that the ideal time, lekatayla, really is the emergence of the stars.
But then, back to the question, if the ideal time is stars emerging, why did saying it early in shul become so dominant, so universal?
The sources give very practical, community-focused reasons. A huge one was keeping the community together for prayer, tefillah b'tzibur. If you let everyone leave after the afternoon service, they might scatter. They might forget the evening service, forget Shema, get busy at home, get tired. So praying together, even a bit early, was seen as better than risking individuals missing it entirely or praying alone. It prioritizes communal prayer and ensures the mitzvah gets done.
So it's this tension, isn't it, between the strict ideal timing from the text and the practical needs of making sure people actually do the mitzvah together as a community.
Precisely. It highlights that dynamic interplay all the time in Jewish law.
You know, this whole deep dive into just these first few lines, it really unpacks so much. Literal meaning, structure, history, centuries of debate.
It really shows how every single word in these texts gets scrutinized, how brilliant minds can read the same phrase and come to different, yet often valid, conclusions, and how real-world practice shapes how the law is lived.
Yeah, we've seen everything from interpreting when you lie down to the Gemara's clever structural analysis using scripture and creation.
Those cool hidden lessons about priests and purity.
And this whole fascinating discussion about why people pray Shema early in shul, even if the book says wait for the stars.
It's a great example of how understanding these texts is really a journey. It's not just about finding the answer, but appreciating the whole conversation.
And that really wraps up our deep dive into the start of Mishnah Berakhot and this incredibly rich discussion about the evening Shema time.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? How much comes out of the very first question in the very first Mishnah. It sparks conversations that echo down 2 millennia.
Absolutely. We saw different ways to read a phrase, the Gemara asking why things are ordered the way they are, the Mishnah's subtle teaching style, and the powerful pull of community custom.
It reminds you that even something seemingly basic has layers upon layers of thought behind it.
Well, a huge thank you to you, our listener, for bringing these sources to us. It was fascinating to explore.
And maybe it leaves us all with something to think about, you know? In our own lives, how do we balance striving for the ideal way to do something with the practicalities of actually getting it done, especially within our communities? It's a timeless question.